Right now, your eyes are open. You're reading these words. Light is flooding through your pupils, hitting the back of your retina. And your brain is constructing a picture of the world in front of you. And you think you're seeing everything. Your brain is throwing most of it away. Quietly. Not only he's shouting quiet, ruthlessly. The mouse fired in the cats without asking your permission. And it's been doing this your entire life. Here's the thing most people never think about. Vision isn't a camera. It's not recording. It's not capturing. It's editing. In real time. Every single second you're awake, your brain is running a brutal filtering operation on the raw flood of visual data pouring in through your eyes. And it is deleting the vast majority of it before you ever become conscious of what was there. Not later. Not after a few hours. Right now. In the fraction of a second between light entering your eye and the image appearing in your mind. Let me show you how this works. Start simple. You walk into a room. A living room. There's a couch, a coffee table, a lamp, a window with curtains, a bookshelf, a rug on the floor, maybe a glass of water on the table. You glance around. You feel like you saw everything. But then, here's what actually happened. Your eyes made a series of rapid movements, tiny little jumps called saccades. Between those jumps, you fixated on maybe 4 or 5 specific points in the room. The couch, the window, the glass of water. That's it. Everything else, the texture of the rug, the exact number of books on the shelf, the pattern on the curtains, your brain filled in from expectation, from memory, from a rough sketch it built based on a lifetime of walking into rooms that look more or less like this one. You didn't see the room. You saw a draft of the room, and your brain convinced you it was the final version. This isn't a flaw. This isn't a glitch. This is the design. Let me explain why. The amount of visual data hitting your retina at any given moment is enormous. We're talking about roughly 10 billion bits of information per second arriving at your eyes. 10 million. In what's the Chinese? Every second. Million stones. Now think about how much of that your conscious mind can actually process. The estimates vary, but the number that keeps showing up in the research is somewhere around 50 bits per second. Maybe a little more if you're really paying attention. 10 billion in torrid shades. Not 50 out. That means your brain is discarding, compressing, or ignoring roughly 99.9999% of the visual information available to it at any given moment. Stop right there. Read that number again. 99.9999%. You are not seeing the world. You are seeing a highly curated, aggressively edited, extremely compressed summary of the world. And the summary is so good, so seamless, so convincing, that you've never once in your life suspected it was a summary at all. That's the trick. That's the magic. The edit is invisible. Now, let's go a layer deeper. The visual information that does make it past the first gate, the stuff your brain decides is worth keeping, even that doesn't last. This is where a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus comes in. Back in the 1880s, long before anyone had brain scanners or neural networks, Ebbinghaus sat down and ran experiments on himself. Simple ones. He memorized lists of nonsense syllables, meaningless combinations of letters, and then tested himself over and over again, see how quickly he forgot them. What he found was devastating. Within 20 minutes, about 40% of the information was gone. Within 1 hour, about 50% was gone. minutes. Within one day, 70% had vanished. And within 1 week, up to 90% of what he had learned had disappeared entirely. He plotted this on a graph. No, hold on. It's called the forgetting curve. And it's been replicated hundreds of times in the century and a half since. The numbers hold. They hold for words, they hold for images, they hold for experiences. 90%. That. Gone. Linear. In a week. And that's the stuff that made it through the filter. That's the stuff your brain initially decided was worth encoding. Even the survivors get deleted. Think about that. You went on a trip last year. Maybe it was a vacation. Maybe it was just a long drive somewhere. You saw hundreds of thousands of visual scenes. Trees, buildings, faces, road signs, clouds, light shifting across landscapes. You experienced all of it. Every photon that entered your eyes was real. Every scene existed. Hurrah! And now, sitting here, how much of it can you actually recall? A handful of moments. A sunset, maybe. I said, I don't see it. I tell Keon, I said, was it? A face. A specific room. My. And a stay. Unchance. A few seconds of a few minutes of a few hours. Of a few days. Everything else is gone. Not faded. Iced she. Not fuzzy. Oh, needed. Gone. Gone. As if it never happened. Your brain weighed it, found it lacking, and quietly sent it to the incinerator. And here's where things get strange. Because this raises a question that most people never ask. If your brain is deleting 90% or more of what you see, and if the remaining 10% is itself a compressed, reconstructed, heavily edited version of reality, then what exactly are you experiencing when you open your eyes? Is it the world? Or is it your brain's best guess about the world? Let me walk you through what actually happens when you see something. Step by step, but newly. Because the process is far more bizarre than you've been told. Light enters your eye. And it's chance in. It passes through the cornea, the lens, and lands on the retina at the back of your eyeball. The retina is a thin sheet of tissue covered in photoreceptors, specialized cells called rods and cones. The cones detect color. The rods detect brightness and movement, especially in low light. These photoreceptors convert the light into electrical signals, not images. No. Signals. Dickman. Is signals raw electrical impulses. Act. Courses. Your eye doesn't send pictures to your brain. It sends code. Now, those electrical signals travel down the optic nerve, a thick bundle of about 1 million nerve fibers, and they head toward the back of your brain. But before they get there, they make a stop. A relay station called the thalamus. Specifically, a part of the thalamus called the lateral geniculate nucleus. And this is the first checkpoint. This is where the editing begins. The thalamus doesn't just pass signals through, it filters them. It decides what's important enough to forward to the visual cortex and what can be safely ignored. Think of it as a bouncer at the door of a nightclub. Most of the signals don't get in. The ones that do make it through travel to the primary visual cortex, area of 1, located in the occipital lobe at the very back of your skull. And here's where things get really interesting. One doesn't process whole images. In its size, it breaks everything down into components. set everything down on into components. Adjustments, contrasts, orientations, lines at specific angles, patches of color, bits of motion. It's not building a picture, it's disassembling one. Taking the incoming code, sorting it into categories so basic, they wouldn't even make sense to you if you could see them directly. From one, the partially processed information splits into two major pathways. The ventral stream, sometimes called the what pathway, runs along the bottom of the brain toward the temporal lobe. This pathway figures out what you're looking at. Is it a face? A car? A tree? A word? The dorsal stream, sometimes called the where pathway, runs along the top of the brain toward the parietal lobe. This pathway figures out where things are in space, how they're moving, and how you might interact with them. Both of these pathways involve progressively more complex processing at each stage. The deeper the information goes into the brain, the more abstract and interpretive the processing becomes. Early areas handle simple features. Deeper areas handle concepts. And at every single stage, information is being discarded, compressed, summarized, thrown away. Now, by the time a visual signal has traveled from your retina, through the thalamus, through VON, through V2, through V4, through the inferotemporal cortex, through the various association areas, and into the regions where it finally becomes something you consciously perceive as an image, it has been transformed almost beyond recognition. What you see is not what entered your eye, and why you see, so don't touch state. What you see is the output of a massively parallel compression algorithm that has been sculpted by 500 million years of evolution to keep you alive in a dangerous world. And keeping you alive is the key phrase here, because that's what the filter is optimized for. Not truth, not completeness, not accuracy. Survival. Your brain doesn't care about the exact pattern on the curtains. It cares about whether there's a predator behind the curtains. It doesn't care about the precise shade of green on every leaf in the forest. It cares about whether one of those leaves is actually a snake. The filter is ruthless because it has to be. Processing visual information is metabolically expensive. Your brain weighs about 3 pounds, roughly 2% of your body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your total energy. The visual cortex alone is a massive energy hog. If your brain tried to fully process every single bit of visual data coming in, it would burn through more glucose than your body could supply. You'd overheat. You'd crash. You'd die. So the brain cheats. I did cheat. Now, speed muscles, right important stage, and she matched to the correctly. Brilliantly. Why these shanaveins? Code words. It builds models, predictions, that is its study, expectations. Neither of It says, I've seen 1,000 living rooms before. I know what a living room looks like, so I'm going to assume this one follows the same general template and only pay close attention to the things that don't fit the template. The things that are unexpected, surprising. Potentially dangerous, potentially rewarding. This is called predictive processing, and it's one of the most important ideas in modern neuroscience. Your brain is not passively receiving the world. It's actively generating the world, predicting what it expects to see based on past experience, and then checking that prediction against the incoming data. If the prediction matches, great. The brain doesn't bother processing the details. It just stamps as expected and moves on. If the prediction doesn't match, that's when you pay attention. That's when the filter opens up. That's when more processing power gets allocated. Wait a minute. You walk into a room and everything is normal. You barely see anything. You walk into a room and there's a tiger sitting on the couch. Now you see everything. Every detail. Watch out for every shadow. Every possible exit. Come on. Sorry. But in this stillness, the brain allocates its resources based on surprise, not based on what's there, based on what's unexpected. Wait, this means something profound. It means your experience of the visual world at any given moment is not a reflection of what is actually in front of you. It's a reflection of how different what is in front of you is from what you expected to be in front of you. You see the world through the lens of your expectations. And when the world matches your expectations, you essentially see nothing at all. Your brain fills in the blanks with a prefabricated template and calls it a day. This is why you can drive for 20 minutes on a familiar route and arrive at your destination with zero memory of the drive. Your brain predicted every turn, every stoplight, every stretch of road, and because nothing surprised it, it barely bothered to process any of it. You were technically looking at the road the entire time. Your eyes were open. Signals were firing. Mini was not tempted to make chaos, but your conscious experience of that visual data was almost non-existent. You were driving on a mental recording of a previous drive. Think about that. You were navigating a 2-ton vehicle at 60 miles an hour through a physical environment, and your brain decided the visual input was so boring, so predictable, that it wasn't worth consciously processing. That's how aggressive the filter is. Now, here's the next piece of the puzzle, and it might be the strangest part of all. The information your brain does keep, the tiny fraction that survives the filter and becomes part of your conscious visual experience. That information isn't stored the way you think it is. You don't have a mental filing cabinet with high-resolution photographs, neatly organized by date. What you have is more like a collection of rough sketches, partial outlines, fragments of color and shape, tagged with emotional associations and contextual cues. When you remember a visual scene, your brain doesn't retrieve a stored image. It reconstructs one misty, necessarily on the spot. From whatever fragments it kept, filled in with whatever it can infer from context, expectation, and general knowledge. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. This is why you and your friend can attend the same event and remember completely different things. This is why the dress looked blue and black to some people and white and gold to others. Your memory of what you saw is not a recording, it's a recreation. And every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it from scratch, which means every memory is slightly different from the last time you remembered it. The act of remembering changes the memory. Scientists at New York University published research showing that the brain works in fundamentally different ways when remembering what we have seen compared to seeing something for the first time. While earlier work suggested significant overlap between perception and memory, the newer findings reveal they are systematically different processes. The brain isn't replaying a tape. It's running a different program entirely. And there's more. Research from Vanderbilt University found that holding a visual memory in your mind can actually contaminate your current perception. If you're remembering something you saw earlier while looking at something new, the memory bleeds into the perception. You literally see the present differently because of what you're remembering from the past. Your memories don't just affect how you interpret the world. They affect how you physically perceive it. The memory and the perception share the same neural real estate. They overlap. No, they interfere with each other. They compete for the same processing resources. So now we have a picture that looks something like this. Your eyes take in 10 billion bits of visual information per second. Your brain filters out 99.99999% of it before it reaches consciousness. The fraction that survives is heavily processed, compressed, and colored by your expectations and prior experience. It's not a photograph of reality. It's a prediction, annotated with whatever surprised you. Then, over the next hour, half of that surviving fraction is deleted. Over the next day, 70% is gone. Over the next week, 90% has vanished. And the small sliver that remains after a week isn't stored as a faithful copy. It's stored as fragments, emotional tags, partial sketches, which your brain will reconstruct into something that feels like a memory the next time you try to recall it, but which is actually a new construction, influenced by everything you've experienced and thought about since the original event. So the question isn't, why do I forget so much? The question is, how do I remember anything at all? And the answer is actually beautiful, in a strange, ruthless way. Your brain remembers what matters, and more precisely, it remembers what mattered, what triggered an emotional response, what was connected to survival, to reward, to danger, to love, to loss. The things that made you feel something got a neurochemical boost, a shot of dopamine, or norepinephrine, or cortisol, that told the hippocampus, hey, this one is important. Encode this one more deeply. Build stronger connections around this one. Flag it for long-term storage. The hippocampus, this seahorse-shaped structure buried deep in the medial temporal lobe, is the gatekeeper of long-term memory. It doesn't store the memories themselves. It stores the index, the map, the connections between the scattered fragments of a visual experience that are distributed across different regions of the cortex. When you remember a visual scene, the hippocampus coordinates the reconstruction, pulling together bits of color from here, bits of spatial layout from there, bits of emotional tone from somewhere else, and assembling them into something that feels coherent. And the perihynal cortex, a structure right next to the hippocampus, plays a specific role in recognizing whether you've seen something before. It handles familiarity. That feeling of I've seen this face before, but I can't remember where. That's perihynal cortex. It's one of the most important structures for object recognition memory, mediating the acquisition, consolidation, and retrieval of visual memories. But here's the thing. No. Even these systems have limits. Even the memories that make it to long-term storage are subject to decay, to interference, to overwriting. New information pushes old information out. Memories that aren't retrieved regularly fade. The connections weaken. The index entries get corrupted. Your brain is not an archive. It's a triage unit. It's constantly deciding what lives and what dies. And it makes those decisions based on a single criterion: usefulness. If a memory isn't being used, if it isn't being retrieved, if it isn't connected to other things you know and care about, the brain gradually lets it go. This is called memory consolidation, and during sleep, your brain runs a massive cleanup operation. It takes the day's experiences, reviews them, decides which ones are worth keeping, strengthens the connections around those, and weakens or eliminates the connections around everything else. When you wake up in the morning, you are literally a slightly different person than when you went to sleep. Some of yesterday's experiences have been permanently wired in. Most have been quietly discarded. Let's go back to that number. 90%. It's not just about what you studied in school or what you read in a book. It's about everything. Every visual experience. Every scene you witnessed. Every face you glanced at. Next to it is Bonchibim, Montide or Libsabin. Voice mass. Every sunset, every street corner, every meal, every room you walked into and walked out of. 90% of it is gone within a week. I only see too. And the 10% that remains is not a faithful copy of what happened. It's a reconstruction, shaped by your emotions, your beliefs, your subsequent experiences, and the very act of remembering itself. So what are you left with? You're left with a story. A narrative your brain has assembled from fragments. A version of your past that is useful, not accurate. Functional, not true. Seemingly say, and here's where it gets philosophical. If 90% of what you see is deleted, and the remaining 10% is heavily reconstructed, then at what point does your visual experience stop being a record of reality and start being a creation of your mind? Think about it this way. Two people stand side by side, looking at the same scene, same photons entering their eyes. But then soon, I know the sacred same physical reality. But one person notices the child playing in the park because she has a child the same age. The other person notices the architecture of the building across the street because he's an architect. They saw the same thing. They experienced completely different things. Their brains ran different filters, kept different fragments. Discarded different details. Built different stories from the same raw material. Now multiply that by every person alive. 7 billion people, each with a unique filter, each constructing a unique version of visual reality from the same physical world. None of them seeing the same thing, and every one of them absolutely certain that what they see is what is actually there. This is the deepest illusion of all. Not that the world is an illusion. The world is real. The photons are real. The objects are real. But your experience of the world, the movie playing inside your head that you call sight, that is a construction, a model, a simulation built from fragments and guesses and predictions and expectations. And 90% of the raw material for that simulation was thrown away before you ever knew it existed. Now, there's a practical side to all of this, and that is more than you might think. Understanding the forgetting curve, understanding how aggressively your brain deletes information, changes how you should approach learning, working, living. Because if you know the deletion is coming, you can fight it. Not by trying to remember everything. That's impossible. And your brain wouldn't let you even if you tried. But by being strategic about what you reinforce. Repetition. That's the simplest weapon against the forgetting curve. When you review information at spaced intervals, you tell your brain, "Hey, I'm using this. Don't delete it." Each review strengthens the neural connections. Each retrieval practice makes the memory more durable. The curve flattens. The decay slows. Connection. When you connect new information to things you already know, you're giving it anchors. Roots. This is never got any mind me. This time actually not. I mentioned it's trial. The brain doesn't store information in isolation. It stores it in networks. A fact that's connected to 10 other facts is 10 times harder to forget than a fact that stands alone. Emotion. Montemain, Einstein at this story. This is the big one. Emotional significance is the brain's primary tagging system for what matters. Information that makes you feel something, that surprises you, that excites you, that challenges you, gets encoded more deeply. This is why you can remember exactly where you were on certain dramatic days of your life, but can't remember what you had for lunch last Thursday. And active engagement, doing something with the information, or writing it down, teaching it to someone else, applying it to a problem. The research on this is clear and has been known since the 1960s. Passive absorption, just reading, just listening, just watching, produces the weakest memories. Active use produces the strongest. But even with all of these strategies, even if you're doing everything right, you're still going to forget most of what you see, most of what you learn, most of what you experience. And that's okay. And because that was never a bug, it was always the feature. Your brain doesn't want to remember everything. Remembering everything would be catastrophic. There are a handful of documented cases of people with hypothymesia, a condition where they remember virtually every day of their lives in vivid detail. And far from being a superpower, most of them describe it as a burden. They can't forget painful experiences. They can't move on. They're trapped in a perpetual present where the past is always just as vivid as the now. Forgetting is freedom. Forgetting is how you generalize from specific experiences, how you extract a lesson without being chained to the detail. You touch a hot stove once. You don't need to remember the exact date, the exact stove, the exact temperature. You just need to remember. Hot things hurt, don't touch. The specific memory can fade. The extracted principle stays. That's what your brain is doing with everything. Extracting the principle. Keeping the lesson. Discarding the details. Building a model of the world that's lean and fast and good enough to keep you alive, even if it's not remotely complete. Now, here's a research finding that ties this all together in a way that I find genuinely astonishing. Scientists in a massive collaboration called the Microns Consortium recently mapped the connections between hundreds of thousands of neurons in a tiny region of the mouse brain involved in visual processing. Just 1 cubic millimeter of brain tissue, about the size of a grain of sand. They cut nearly 28,000 ultra-thin slices of that tissue, imaged every one of them with electron microscopy, and then spent months stitching the images together and tracing the connections using artificial intelligence. What they found is that even in this minuscule volume, the complexity is staggering. Hundreds of thousands of neurons, millions of connections, and the firing patterns of those neurons, in response to visual stimuli, follow intricate, highly organized rules that we're only beginning to understand. A grain of sand's worth of brain, and it contains more complexity than any human-made system ever built. Now scale that up to the entire visual cortex. Scale it up to the entire brain. 86 billion neurons, making trillions of connections. And all of it working together to perform this seemingly impossible task, taking 10 billion bits of raw visual data per second, compressing it down to a tiny fraction, constructing a coherent, useful, real-time model of the world, and then selectively storing the fragments that matter, while letting everything else dissolve. All of it happening below the surface of your awareness. All of it happening right now, as you process these words, as your eyes move across the screen, as your brain decides, in real time, which of these ideas to keep, and which to quietly discard by morning. And deeper regions of the brain, the ones farthest from the sensory surface, they process visual information, more slowly and more persistently. They hold on to it longer. They smooth out the rapid fluctuations so that the world doesn't feel like a strobe light. They give your experience a sense of continuity, of stability, even though the raw data is changing constantly. Your brain is building a stable world out of unstable data, a continuous experience out of discrete snapshots. A unified image out of fragmented signals from two separate eyes, each with a blind spot that the brain fills in using educated guesses based on surrounding information. You never notice the blind spot. You never notice the gaps between eye movements. That works. You said. You never notice the constant deletion, the compression, the reconstruction. It all feels seamless. Seamless. It all feels like you're simply opening your eyes and seeing what's there. But you're not. You're seeing what your brain decides you need to see. What I decide you need to see, which is a very different thing. So what does all of this mean? It means that the world you experience, the world of color and light and faces and landscapes and movement and beauty, is not a direct readout of physical reality. It's a story your brain tells you. A very good story. An incredibly useful story. A story that's been refined by hundreds of millions of years of natural selection to be exactly as accurate as it needs to be to keep an organism alive long enough to reproduce. Not more accurate than that. Not more complete than that. Just enough. And the 90% that gets deleted. What? That was never meant for you. It was background noise. Redundant data. The cost of having a brain that can process the world in real time is that the world it processes is a radical simplification of what's actually out there. You live inside the simplification. You always have. Every memory you cherish is a reconstruction. Every scene you recall is an approximation. Every visual experience you ever had was a compressed, filtered, prediction-enhanced model that bore only a passing resemblance to the full electromagnetic reality bouncing around the physical world. And somehow, despite all of that, it works. You navigate rooms. You recognize faces. Names. You catch baseballs. You read emotions. You fall in love with sunsets. You build civilizations. All on 10% of the data. Of the data. Or less. Your brain doesn't need to see everything. It just needs to see enough. And the line between everything and enough is the entire story of human perception. We think we see the world as it is. We don't. We see the world as we need it to be. And then we forget most of that too. The forgetting curve is not a failure of the brain. It's the brain's most important feature. The ability to let go of what doesn't matter so you can hold on to what does. 90% deleted. Why? 10% reconstructed. And from that tiny, imperfect, constantly shifting fragment of reality, you build your entire conscious life. Mystery solved? Not even close. We can describe what the brain does. We can measure the forgetting curve. We can trace the neural pathways. We can map the connections in a grain of sand's worth of tissue. But why it feels like something to see, why there's an experience at all, why the electrical firing of neurons produces a world of color and depth and meaning that remains the deepest unsolved problem in all of science. We know the brain deletes 90% of what you see. We know it reconstructs the rest. We know it does all of this without you ever noticing. What we don't know is who the you is that's doing the noticing. That's the real mystery. And it's happening right now, behind your eyes. In the dark, where the light has already been turned into code, and the code has already been mostly thrown away. And what's left is being stitched together into something that feels impossibly like the whole world. That's perception. That's memory. That's you, right now, seeing everything and almost nothing, all at the same time.